Hello, my name is Sophie Rain, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. The aim of this session is to try to get you to consider gender in Priestley's and Inspector calls. More specifically, this will look at how female emotions are dismissed or exaggerated throughout the play, and what the significance of this is. Exploring literature through this critical lens is one of the things you will get the opportunity to do if you decide to take English literature at university. This session will consist of me guiding you through my interpretations of the text, as well as providing you opportunities to complete activities in your workbook. If you don't have this to hand, you'll also be able to complete this with pen and paper. I will let you know when to pause to complete the tasks and press play when you're ready to continue. Firstly, I want you to consider what is meant by the term hysterical. Write down any words and phrases that you associate with this term in your workbook around the word on the mind map. Take some time to complete this activity now, pausing the recording and pressing play when you're ready to continue. So some of the examples that you might have come up with might be dramatic, emotional, uncontrollable, tantrums, excessive or childish. Look to see whether your words are largely positive or negative. Is this something that you would take offence to being called, for example? Hysterical, meaning uncontrollable emotions, comes from a historic medical and psychiatric condition, hysteria. This misdiagnosis was particularly prevalent in the 18th and 19th centuries and was predominantly seen as a female disorder, as women were disproportionately diagnosed with this. Hysteria was categorised by nervousness, anxiety, rage, fainting, shortness of breath and irritability. During this time, a rest cure was recommended. Resting could include being force-fed while strapped to a bed, or electrotherapy using the belts that are shown on the slide. Art historian Sarah Jaffrey found that the decline in electrotherapy and more extreme treatments was due to World War I soldiers experiencing the symptoms of hysteria. It was then termed war neuroses or shell shock. So now we've looked at a little bit of the context surrounding women and hysteria in the 19th and early 20th century. I just want you to try activity 2 in your workbook, which asks these questions. So firstly, do you think there's a reason why women were disproportionately diagnosed with hysteria? Number 2, why do you think treatments became less severe following World War I? And then, considering the time in which the play was set, 1912, how do you think emotional women would have been viewed then? When you're ready, go on to the next slide. So feminist scholars have argued that the diagnosis of hysteria was a way of controlling women's emotions and bodies. There is much literature in the Victorian Edwardian period, which shows the concern of women being wrongfully confined in asylums for refusing to obey their husbands. You'll find this on a recommended reading list at the end of the PowerPoint. Also, treatments became less severe after World War I, as soldiers were returning from war presenting with hysteria symptoms. So this was no longer seen as a female malady, and the focus became orientated around humane treatment and therapeutic alternatives. So we can also argue there was more of a reluctance to diagnose men with hysteria and have them confined because of the gender politics at the time. So looking at the time in which the play was set, there may well have been remnants of the idea of female hysteria by 1912, as this was pre-World War I. Women were seen as overly emotional and not able to participate in logical and rational debate. So by the time, though, that the play was obviously presented in 1945, attitudes will have been changing. We're going to be looking at the character of Sheila primarily for the rest of the session. So Sheila has the most emotional response to the interrogation and to learning about the death of Eva. She's also described as hysterical throughout the play, and this is coming from both stage directions and the dialogue from other characters. So try to consider, just in the back of your mind as we go through the next few activities, whether this reflects Sheila's immaturity or her compassion, and what is Priestley trying to reveal about her character by presenting her this way. Context is key to understanding Sheila's emotional responses to the investigation, and how these responses are received by the family. Look at the quotation on the slides provided. In your workbook for activity 3, next to each quotation, write down who is describing Sheila as hysterical, what is the context, i.e. when does this occur, and what is Sheila responding to, and finally, what is Priestley trying to show the audience? So if you want to pause the recording now and take some time to complete this, press play when you're ready to continue. Okay, so just to go through these questions now then. So the first quotation shows Sheila laughing in a hysterical manner as she's realising the omniscience of the inspector, while the rest of her family are still in the dark. She's in awe of how much the inspector knows and is laughing at the ignorance of her family. Her emotions here, and inappropriate laughter, shows she is frightened and that her family have yet to grasp the gravity of the situation. For the second quotation, Mrs. Burling refers to her as a hysterical child when Sheila attempts to interrupt her. Her reason for the interruption was to try and stop Mrs. Burling incriminating Eric and the rest of the family. This reveals the urgency in her voice is misconstrued as a childish attempt for attention or a show of her immaturity, when it is in quite fact the opposite, and she actually has quite a bit of insight. Sheila sarcastically states of Gerald that he means I'm getting hysterical now. The reason for this is because Gerald argues that Sheila has had a difficult and emotional night and should be excused from the remainder of the interrogation. This is not to protect Sheila, or because she is unable to handle the emotional situation, but for his own purposes, as he does not wish to reveal more about his affair with Daisy Renton in the presence of his fiancée. Again, we see the male characters attempting to control Sheila for their own purposes, by belittling her reasonable opinions and insinuating that she is not emotionally fit to deal with the interrogation. The final quotation here is a stage direction, showing how Sheila reacts to her mother's outrage at the inspector's rudeness. Sheila is incredulous at the boldness of her mother, who has failed to understand the severity of the situation. So now we've had a look at Sheila's outbursts in context, it's worth examining some critical questions. So firstly, is Sheila being hysterical, or is she just frustrated at her family? Does describing Sheila as hysterical or emotional affect her authority with either her family or with the audience? What is Priestley trying to reveal about the emotions of men and women? And finally, does Sheila's class have anything to do with her emotional reactions? So how can we compare these emotional responses to, say, Eva's, for example? So have a look at the next activity in your workbook where you'll find these questions, and take some time to complete this activity now, pressing pause and then pressing play when you're done. It is clear that Sheila's emotional reactions are proportionate to the seriousness of the situation. Her family's calm and indifferent attitude causes her to be frustrated. The family pay less attention to Sheila's outbursts throughout by dismissing them as childish, ignoring what she is saying, despite how intuitive she is and how useful her insight could be in helping to both educate and protect them. While she doesn't hold much authority with the family, the audience finds her more credible because her emotional reactions show she has a level of compassion and understanding on par with the inspector. For the third question, it's worth examining how men and women in the play react and why they are reacting this way. The more emotional characters are younger, so it appears age matters in some respects. However, Priestley shows that women's emotions are constantly suppressed. Eva, for example, is applauded by Gerald for the mature attitude to their breakup. Mr. Burling also encourages Sheila to disregard Gerald's affair as he believes she's overreacting. And for the final consideration, class could also be a factor. Sheila has clearly been sheltered through her entitled upbringing. Throughout, the other male characters continue to try to shield her. By not being exposed to the same hardships as Eva, Sheila undoubtedly struggles to manage the stress, upset, and guilt brought about by the interrogation. Eva, however, reacts to each injury done to her by the men in the play, particularly Eric and Gerald, with a quiet dignity. Her unwillingness to show her emotions could also signify an awareness of her place in society, and that working class women had to very often accept their position. Sheila, however, has the luxury of being able to express her emotions more freely than Eva did. For your final activity, I want you to consider how Priestley presents women of different generations. So while Sheila is presented as hysterical, Mrs. Burling restrains her emotions. Why do you think Priestley chose to present them this way? If you pause the audio now and take some time to complete this question, press play when you're ready to continue. So on the one hand, Mrs. Burling represents the idea of the angel of the house. She can control and manage her emotions for the ease and comfort of her husband. However, Mrs. Burling's unaffected emotions when listening to the death of Eva, rather than presenting her as mature and calm, reveals her to be callous. She only shows distress when she recognises she has contributed to the death of her own grandchild and the worry about a scandal. Priestley suggests that emotion does not necessarily equate to immaturity, but rather a comprehension of the scale of injustice. Sheila's outrage is justified. She seems to be the only rational Burling throughout. Mrs. Burling is composed and follows social etiquette. Priestley suggests that this sense of etiquette would not be the priority, or we hope would not be the priority, of the next generation. The mental strength and fortitude of women had been proven to many during World War II. and Priestley appeals to his female audience and encourages them, like Sheila, to be vocal about injustice wherever they may find it. Many thanks for listening to this session. I hope that it's been helpful to you in showing the subtle ways that Priestley constructs female characters and challenges the concept of the hysterical woman. For more information about studying English literature at Lancaster University, please follow the link on the slide. Thank you. Further titles in the An Inspector Calls workshop series include Morality, Public versus Private, and Interruptions.